Welcome back to Comic Book History, Episode 5. Sorry it's been a little while since I've done this one. Been a few weeks, but original. I did promise that the previous episode was going to be the subject I'm talking about this episode, but I decided to move to this one because I want to talk about Iron Man. This one I want to talk about the Transformers comic books. Now, there have been Transformers comic books on and off since 1984, which is the birth of the Transformers line of comic books. Yeah, I think it's, let's see, it came out in 1984, yes. And initially, here's the thing about it. Initially, this was announced as a 4-issue limited series, which was later expanded into an ongoing series, which lasted 80 issues and was concluded in 1991. Now, why was it continued? Popular demand. And it was a damn good series. I recently got a chance to read the whole thing, and alongside of it, we had a few miniseries. Of course, I wasn't there, basically. There was a few miniseries that went along with the actual ongoing series. You had G.I. Joe and Transformers, Transformers Headmasters, Transformers the movie, which is an adaptation of the 1906 anime movie from which featured Orson Welles as Unicron. Good movie, by the way, despite the death of Optimus Prime. I know that's a spoiler, but people have known that for years. And of course, Transformers Universe, which is simply a handbook. It's kind of like the Marvel handbook that they've known publishing on up since the 70s. Yeah, it served the same purpose. Basically, it's bios and history of the Transformers. During the course of the original Marvel comic book, there's some interesting things happen. Like by the end of issue 4, pretty much all the Transformers except for Shockwave were all killed. And then by the start of the next issue, issue 5, which came some months later, pretty much most of them came back, and throughout a good chunk of the series up until issue 50, which I think was up until they decided to set the comics after the events of the movie, pretty much there was a power struggle in the Decepticons. There was one point that Laserbeak, one of those cassette tape things from Soundwave, he would briefly take over the Decepticons and do one of the most infamous stories of all, the Carl Washington, which is from issue 34. Heck, there was at one point Optimus Prime committed suicide because he thought he cheated. Yeah. I mean, the series is very well serialized for what it is, and one of the most really bizarre moments, and I'm surprised hardly anybody talks about this. People tend to talk about, Optimus Prime killing himself because of he cheated a video game against Megatron or the car wash Doom stuff. But the one thing I thought was really bizarre, and this never happened in the cartoon that happened in the 80s. Galvatron meeting Megatron, which is basically what they have in the IDW comic, which I'll get to in a minute. But, and of course, it counters zombies, stuff like that. And I should also mention there was, in fact, a comic counterpart for it in the United Kingdom. A comic that lasted for 332 issues. Now, this comic actually lasts a little bit longer than the Marvel comic. This one was published weekly. Yes, weekly. And on occasion, it might have it usually would have new stories, and probably the most infamous from the series is and this is from issue 262, published in 1999, which is on the Wikipedia site. It's Grimlock versus Shockwave. Which, by the way, Shockwave was actually a lot more better character in the comic book than he was in the G1 cartoon. As a matter of fact, he actually appeared more than just 1 or 2 episodes, and he actually transformed a lot more, and he was a badass, too. But the interesting thing about the UK comic book is that it introduced the character Death's Head, which is an alien bounty hunter who has appeared on and off in Marvel Comics since then. But in order to make sure Hasbro owned the rights to the character, from what I've heard from Lewis Lovehawk, aka Lucara, that he brought this up in, I believe, his review for Transformers, if I'm not mistaken, 4 and 5 of the Dreamwave comic book, which I'll get to that soon. of how deaths had first appeared in the Doctor Who comic book, and then appeared in Transformers. Then he was simply dumped in the Marvel Universe because they left the character's reason why. But there was at one point in issue 3 where Spider-Man guest starred in the book. Now, the reason why that this was because Marvel was promoting the fact that the Transformers comics book took place in the same universe. But due to the fact they lost the license, they pretty much deemed that comic non-canon. And simply put, the Transformers comic book takes place in a different universe, takes place in the same universe as the G.I. Joe comic book. Now, the G.I. Joe comic book was launched 2 years prior to this. Now, I will eventually get to an episode where I talk about the G.I. Joe comic book, so I want to talk about Transformer once because this year is their 32nd anniversary. Because 2 years ago they celebrated 30 years, which, here's something by sheer coincidence when it comes to 1984. Besides the fact Transformers celebrated their 30th anniversary in 2014, Ghostbusters also celebrated 30 years in 2014 by having the original Ghostbusters film re-released in theaters. I had to point that out. Now, had the license to publish the comic book until like 93. They tried to sort of tie it. They even had their Gen 2 comic book, which was 12 issues. It was okay. It was really bizarre, and the first issue said, "Not your daddy's Transformers," which I'm thinking, the comic came out in 1992, and they're saying, "Not your daddy's Transformers?" What the heck? Yeah, it's really bizarre, to say the least. Yeah, it came out in 93. It took place after issues 138 to 142 of G.I. Joe American Hero. Now, as far as I know, that this series has been printed in trade thanks to Titan Books, but I don't think IDW has reprinted this. They have reprinted the original Marvel comic book, the 80-issue comic. They have collected that twice, but for some reason, this is really bizarre. When they get to issue 3, they don't reprint the whole issue. They just put the cover in, put a synopsis of the issue, and black out Spider-Man because they own the rights to Spider-Man. Which, something that kind of bothered me about that, especially when they had the crossover with Marvel in 2005. Was it 05, was it? When was this? It was in 2007. When they had a crossover with New Avengers. Now, I would have thought, like Dynamite did with when Spider-Man did a crossover with Sonya, Marvel was allowed to put the issue where Red Sonja originally teamed up with Spider-Man, which was Marvel Team Up number 79. They put that in trade when they put the Spider-Man Sonja series into an actual trade. Which I keep thinking, though, why couldn't Marvel do that with New Avengers Transformers by putting in there the issue featuring Spider-Man? Of course, Spider-Man at that point was wearing the black costume, and that issue was the only time he appeared in the series. Also, they had Nick Fury show up in the series once with Dum-Dum Dugan for like one issue. Heck, there was a joke that, like, I hope it's not Godzilla back again, which I thought was so funny. Yeah. But Marvel did lose the license in 1993. Of course, it says here they had the UK comic book, but after that, it took about a decade before we got another Transformers comic book, which was published by Dreamwave, a independent company that was started under Image, which later broke off on its own. They published a few comic books, some comic books published under their tenure. You have the Generation 1 comic book, which lasted for 10 years. Well, actually, it lasted, it lasted for 6. They had some series, and Dreamwave did a little bit more with Transformers than Marvel did. The problem with the series is the fact that the comic would, where Pat Lee would draw the Transformers, and of course the company itself went out of business. Now, the Pat Lee and his partner basically, and this is really bizarre, yeah, for some reason they decided to embezzle from the company and spend the money on a sports car. Now I'm thinking, this is an independent comic book company that had just started, and the company went out of business within 2 years. Yeah, because here's the thing. Pat Lee and his partner, who else on Dreamwave? Let's see, where is it? Yeah, Pat Lee was an artist. Pat Lee and Rod Lee, the company went out of business within 9 years. But when it broke off on its own, it didn't last too long. It lasted for just for a few years, and then the company went out of business. Now, as far as I know, the Dreamwave stuff has not been put into trade, mainly because some people think it's quite bad. And plus also, Pat Lee, now, one of the problems with Pat Lee when he was running Dreamwave is that he would never pay his employees at all. He basically, him and his partner, Roger Lee, which I think is his brother or something, they took the money. Now, they started up a new company and had the Transformers license, briefly. Let's see, what was the name of that company? It was it Penny Comics? No. It was some company that briefly replaced Dreamwave after they went out of business. No, it wasn't the. It was No, it was nobody. After the company went out of business, after a few years after they had the license, they lost it to IDW, which started up a couple years later, and IDW still has a license to this very day. And IDW has done a lot with Transformers, publishing a bunch of miniseries, a few ongoing series, one-shots. They have done more with the Transformers license than what Marvel and Dreamwave were doing. And they've only had the license since, let's see, published comic 2005. Yeah. They got the license right after, the company started in, let's see, it doesn't say when this company started, but it's one of their bread and butter things, you know, where they get licensed comic books for media stuff. Like, they've had stuff not only for the Hasbro stuff, but they also currently have, like, Gem-and holograms. Let's see, what else? They don't have He-Man. DC has He-Man. Basically, anything that's licensed, they usually have. Heck, they even have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And IDW is a great company. And one of the ways now, when they had their when they had the Transformers series be successful, they decided to explore the backstory. Like, the earliest chronological miniseries is a miniseries known as Megatron Origin, which is simply Megatron's backstory. Now there have been other stuff with the company, and currently, and just recently, they just wrapped up well, not entirely, no. There's still a one-shot left to come out for the crossover. It's called Revolution. Mainly involved ROM and having all the Hasbro properties, which basically consist of G.I. Joe, Transformers, ROM, Action Man, and the Micronauts. And for some reason, and I don't know if anybody's ever asked Hasbro about this, why isn't My Little Pony part of this? Now, there is a theory that My Little Pony is just too big to be part of the Hasbro universe. So, okay. And I've heard the theory of why IDW did this, because they're planning a shared universe for the Hasbro toys for the movies. Now, Hasbro got the rights to ROM back in 2012, and of course, ROM is currently published by IDW, along with Micronauts, two comic books like Transformers and G.I. Joe, which were originally published by Marvel. Action Man has never received the comic book until recently, though it's a damn good series. I'm more used to the CGI series than the previous series, which was a spy series. I did like the Action Man, the 2000 series. It was really good. But I am kind of used to this, the whole Action Man thing. Now, They also threw in Mask. I almost forgot Mask. They threw that in there too. As a matter of fact, the cars Mask use are actually based upon Cybertronian technology they took from Cup. Yes, Cup. During the course of the crossover, Miles Mayhem, the former leader of Mask, basically had Cup captured and used some of his parts to build the cars used for Mask. And from what I remember reading from the last issue, the first team was killed off during the crossover, with the exception of Matt Trucker, the leader of the team. And I should point out, unlike in the original show, which I've never watched the original show, apparently he was white in the original show that happened back in the 80s. Of course, DC was the first company to get the license for that one too, and that was they published 4-issue miniseries and had a brief ongoing series which lasted 9 issues and a couple of annuals. I only bring up Mask because, well, Mask is part of the same continuity as Transformers, G.I. Joe, Rob, Action Man, and Micronauts. Though the Micronauts didn't do much during the crossover, the crossover was written by Justin Berber and Colin Bunn. Colin Bunn, basically, the only series he was writing prior to this that is one of the Hasbro properties is Micronauts. The Transformers, now there's only one Transformers book being published right now, and that's Till All Are One. It features some of the other characters. Now, I think for some people they were initially against having Transformers having more than one ongoing series. But there actually is a reason for the multiple ongoing series. I mean, first it was simply just a regular Transformers title. Then it was, and when that ended, they split it off the 2 separate series. You had Transformers More Meets the Eye and Transformers Robots in Disguise. Now, they would consider that they would operate separately. Like More Meets the Eye would operate, have a team of Transformers Little Optimus Prime operating in space. This lasted for about almost 2 years. Robots in Disguise is the Earth-based team of Transformers. That's simply the way it was. Then, and this is quite bizarre though, the comic Robots in Disguise actually stopped calling itself Transformers Robots in Disguise. They would just call it Transformers. Now, my theory, and Hasbro has never released IDW has never, I've never heard an article exactly why they changed the name of the series. My theory is that the reason why they changed the name of the series to just Transformers is to avoid confusion with the Robots in Disguise TV show, the second one, not the first one from the 90s, which I've watched a few episodes of that. It's an okay series. They did it so they can avoid confusion because, and this confusion actually makes more sense than the other times I've heard why people change names of comic books. This one makes more sense because if they have a comic book called Transformers Robots in Disguise, people mistakenly believe that it takes place in the same continuity as the Transformers Robots in Disguise TV show. They did publish a comic book called Transformers Robots in Disguise, which was published and is set in that very continuity. I've watched the pilot episode of the series, Robots in Disguise. Interesting start. And they have brought in new characters, and one of my big criticisms of this series was the fact they did not include Megatron in the series. Now, the series itself is ending really soon, and I do not know what's replacing, though they have the Rescue Bot series also on too, which I think is going to end too. Now, from what I've heard, and this is a bit bizarre though, apparently IDW is not allowed to use Unicron. Apparently Hasbro basically deemed it where they can't use Unicron. They can use the Quintessentials, which were kind of one of the people who was credited for creating in story the Transformers. Their only appearance is basically in hieroglyphs. Yes. Now, one of my personal favorite miniseries that have been released under all the Transformers books is Ironhide. Yes, Ironhide had his own miniseries, where apparently got killed off and revived by the legendary Transformer known as Alpha Trion. It's a really damn good series. Here's the thing. It's kind of like the pilot episode for the Twilight Zone. Like, where is everybody? It's like you have Ironhide waking up on Cybertron and it's completely deserted. The whole planet deserted. And all of a sudden he hears sounds, and it's the Insecticons who have gone wild, and they're mindless drones. And of course, he finds that part of Cybertron is still got power. And of course, he runs into Alpha Trion, which apparently he never heard of before. And of course, he runs into a Transformer I've barely heard of before, like Rimran, I think his name is. And of course, they decided to after trying to leave with Megaplex, they decided to become Bug Zappers. Yeah, simply put, Ironhide became a exterminator. Yep, he did. There was this other crossover, Dark Cybertron, which happened about 2 years ago. Pretty much the dead was coming back, and there's all zombies, stuff like that. Now, here's something interesting though. During the crossover, Bumblebee was killed, and apparently Megatron become friends with Bumblebee. And here's something interesting. I kind of heard rumors about this. Megatron became an Autobot. Yes, Megatron, the leader of the Decepticons, who at this point, the Decepticon leader is Galvatron. Now, from what I know currently in the comic books right now when it comes to Transformers, the war is over. They're basically at peace, but they're not allies. They are basically, they're still two separate factions, but they are working together to basically coincide in peace. Ravage joined the Autobots, and recently Soundwave joined the Autobots too. Now, from what I've heard, the Transformers comic book, which originally was Robots in Disguise, has ceased publication. And also I've heard the Optimus Prime begins a spin-off series, and of course the Mortal CI series was ended and replaced with Lost Legion. I do not know if there's going to be any more Transformers ongoing series. Oh, I should also point out that there was one big new Transformers introduced thanks to IDW. Her name is Windblade. Yes, I mentioned this review. Apparently, they decided to give her 2 miniseries. People apparently like her so much. She's apparently the focus character of the Transformers 2-All-1 series. And one of her primary abilities is that she can talk to Titans. Now, what are the Titans in the Transformers universe? They're basically giant-sized robots, which are bigger than the regular Transformers. I mean, the Titans are the size of planets. That's how big these things are. Now her title is that she is a representative of her world, and she's a city speaker. Yeah, and I like this character. I really do. It's interesting, though, she's got a little more spotlight than RC. Excuse me. RC is definitely in the continuity. She's barely used. And because the fact there are so many Transformers, it makes sense the fact that the Transformers franchise would have 2 or 3 ongoing series. Which itself is still going to this very day. So IDW has had this license for 11 years, and they've done a great job with it, producing a lot of really good comic books. Now, I've read a good chunk of what IDW has published, and that's only in the past 2 years I've jumped on the Transformers, and so far I have not come across a bad comic book. Now, one of people's biggest problems with the Transformers comic book published by IDW is there's so much stuff to read. I don't have a really big problem with it like other people do. So because I can get through a comic book, not much a problem. Though it does take me a little bit longer than some other comic books because there's lots and lots of talking and less action, per se. But, yeah. They're still enjoyable comics to read, and I highly recommend them. In the case of the IDW comic, some people have asked me exactly where do I start with the Transformers IDW comic books. I would start with Megatron the Origin. Simply because that's the start. I would start in chronological order of basically how, basically go to Wikipedia, which basically has the Transformers timeline, every single comic book done in chronological order. I would do that, and that is, from what I can tell, pretty accurate. Despite the fact it can be edited per se, and some things must be unpublished, but it's a dang good. It's a really good guide on exactly how you should read the Transformers series. Now, there's only been overall about 4 ongoing series published for Transformers: the Transformers comic book, Transformers Robots in Disguise as Transformers Volume 2, Transformers Marvel Meets CI, and of course, Transformers Total R1. With 4 ongoing series and a bunch of mini-series and one-shots, basically you can definitely say the IDW tends to pump out Transformers a lot. And I gotta say about Revolution, it's a great crossover. But one thing I do recommend is this. Now, the thing with this thing is it's not jump-on friendly. You can't just jump on the Revolution without reading any other comic book. The only comic book I do recommend reading prior to reading Revolution, there's about 3 of them I recommend besides Megatron The Origin. I would read All Hail Megatron, the original Transformers comic book the idea published. Oh, I also mentioned that they have published a comic book that revived the Marvel continuity called Regeneration 1. Unlike the G.I. Joe comic book, the G.I. Joe American Hero comic book, where they revived numbering, definitely. But that one picks up right where the last issue left that Marvel published. Transformers did something completely different. They brought the same creative team back, the last one they had when the series ended, but they decided to jump ahead 20 years later, where Earth is pretty much a wasteland, and Megatron is basically a despot. It's a really weird series per se, but the series ended after only 20 issues published. I honestly don't know why, and it's something though that comic book basically ended after it reached is one. Now, here's something about that comic book you should know. The comic itself continues the numbering that the original Transformers comic from Marvel published. Now, they couldn't call it just simply just Transformers because that would be just confusing. They put in the Regeneration 1 to know for a fact that this is not set in the IDW continuity they have had for the past several years. Now, the comic was ended issue 100 simply because they wanted to finish the story they wanted to tell, unlike G.I. Joe American Hero, where there's still a bunch of story to tell for that. But, suffice to say, Transformers is awesome. Alright, so, that's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode, where I will talk about an imprint by Marvel that they published in the 90s. They only lasted for a few years. What imprint is that? Midnight Suns. I've always wanted to talk about the Midnight Suns imprint, and I'm going to talk about it in the very next episode. Okay? So until then, I will see you there. Bye.